Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, GenAI in higher education with special guest New York Times bestselling author Laura Torres Newey. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
Hey, Laura, you got a really incredible background. You're a friend of mine and my wife. And
that's the most incredible thing right there.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. But you're New York Times bestselling author. You're teaching in the universities. And you and I were talking the other day, probably a month ago. And I asked you a simple question, which spurred this really great conversation. I said, where's my mic? I need my mic, right? And that was, what are you going to do about generative AI in the classroom and in the college level? Because you teach English and critical thinking at the university level. So what are you going to do about it? Because at the time you're going, there's lots of different, but now
I probably just put my head in my hands and screamed at that point because it's a big question. And I think, a while back, Elon Musk said in an interview about AI, he said things are getting weird and they're getting weird fast. And it's been terrifying for people at the universities, not so much AI itself, but just what do we do about it? Because it changes everything. It does.
Well, that's what I thought. Right? It changes a lot of things. How do you teach? How do you grade? Right? Because my kids already know how to use it. My teenagers, they're going to get A's in all their English class. I have no doubt, right? Because they know how to do all the stuff, and so it's a major change. But before we get in there, I want people to hear your background because you got a great background. So let's hear a little bit about Laura.
It sounds like I've done a lot of different things, but really it's all been in books and publication and writing. So when I was 14 years old, I got a job as a library where I was shelving books, and I checked out more than I shelved, and I didn't have to pay late fees. So I took home more than I shelved. But anyway, from then on out, I was always involved in books and publishing and that kind of thing for, in one way or another. But I started out in children's publishing. I worked at several different children's publishing houses as a senior editor and a writer, an American Girl magazine as an editor. And mostly I wrote books on my own as a freelancer and did well with that. It was fun. Nonfiction, magazine articles, a couple novels. I worked as a newspaper reporter at one point, which wasn't a good fit because I love the immediacy of it, but I don't like bothering people, especially ones that are in a crisis situation. But then I got married. I moved to Sacramento, which is not known for its children's publishing scene. And I was kind of burnt out on the freelance stuff. And so I went back to school and got my master's, deciding I was going to teach creative writing because I had just come off of the 2 novels, and ended up teaching composition instead because I had to go back and take several undergrad composition courses, and I saw how it was done poorly. And I thought, I need to step into it better here because I thought I was going to die of boredom in those classes, and that's my jam. So I just, I started that, and ever since then I've been teaching English, critical thinking, reading, and writing at the most basic level, and a lot of times for students who are not quite up to college level writing yet.
Well, you recently did something really interesting and exciting.
Yeah, interesting is one way to put it. So I teach at a prison here in California, and it's a high security prison, and it's old school because they have no technology. They're supposed to get laptops soon, but no technology. So pencil, paper. That's it. Completely old school.
Wow. What a big change, because you did that this year so far. You've done that. So you're going to move from teaching these inmates with paper and pencil, no internet access, to now kids having a pretty incredible new technology, generative AI, that has the knowledge of the world at their fingertips.
Yeah, and it's a completely different thing. The classes aren't even going, they're not even going to look alike, because what it comes down to for me at its most basic form, as far as grade, well, I don't care so much about grading as I do about learning, but the end product doesn't matter as much to me anymore, because
Oh,
anybody can come
wait,
up
did a
with,
teacher just say that? The end
yeah,
product doesn't
I
matter as
did.
much anymore.
I did, because anybody can come up with a polished end product between Grammarly and AI. Now that's simplistic, because of course you've got to have the good argumentation and the critical thinking skills and,
Right.
the research, solid thesis, all of that kind of stuff. But what I'm going to be doing is teaching and grading on the process, and not so much on the end product, in order to not to circumvent cheating or trying to get nail students that are going to use AI, but my job is to teach critical thinking. It's not to teach where the commas go. And so the only way I can really see to do that is to focus on the process. Show me your sources. Why are these sources good? Can you identify misinformation? Can you get to the reading level to understand the peer-reviewed literature? Now give me an outline. Now, what are you going to argue? And the most important thing, one of the most important things to me, is the counter arguments and the counterpoints. Because we'll get to this in a minute. One of my biggest fears for generative AI in the classroom is bias.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And if my students are putting in prompts and they get one point of view only, there goes the critical thinking. And I have a real concern. Colleges lean one way as far as ideology, and
especially in the liberal arts colleges, right? Right.
correct. There's no room for certain voices already, and the kids who have a different voice and buck against that system are quickly silenced. But at least, at least they're thinking, at least they're expressing themselves. If generative AI really has the kind of bias that I'm thinking it does at this point, not only are they not going to, I don't quite know how to express it. What's going to be put out is only going to be sort of one point of view. I'm really concerned about that. I hope it evolves beyond that.
I just talked to an expert in generative AI about the bias thing. And he goes, it's really interesting what you can do with the generative AI now, in that you can give it different personas. You can say, I want you to write a conservative article. I want you to write a more progressive article, a more liberal article. I want you to pretend like you're from a different country. You can have it do those sorts of things and get alternate egos and alternate personalities coming out of the generative AI.
Is it bad that I don't trust that?
Yeah,
is it bad that I don't trust that it would give a genuine conservative viewpoint?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question.
I have to stress here that I'm an end user only. I have no understanding of how the technology works.
Well, yeah, and how the technology works is real simple. If we simplify it down, data in, data out.
Yeah.
So a Gen AI will give opinions based off the type of data that's been put in. One of the biggest examples of that was an AI that was let loose on the internet by Microsoft years ago, and all the trolls came out. And with 24 hours, they had to shut it down, the AI, because it became so misogynistic and cursing, and it was a racist and all these things, because people were feeding it that type of stuff. It wasn't gathering information from all over. In fact, ChatGPT 2 had extreme bias, and to the point where it was unusable, because they just gathered a bunch of stuff off the internet. So there's a lot of vulgarity and crudeness and all that. So what they did was they had people curating the data. So in essence, ChatGPT is curated data, which means it's biased by nature.
Yeah. And you know what goes right along with that? So I'm afraid of the bias. I'm afraid of the loss of critical thinking skills, but I think that we can learn to redirect and teach in a different way. And honestly, my biggest fear that I haven't heard discussed a lot is that we're going to lose unique voices. Because you said, well, you can put on different personas, ask it to do things, but it is going to come out in a generic way for that persona. And often it's horrible. I did some generative AI for my students in the prison, and I had it do a certain topic, and I was testing out the different voices, and I asked it to do it in rap. I was reading it to the students, and one of them nearly had a heart attack, and he said, no one has said yo in a rap since the 90s. So it wasn't an authentic voice. And it's like our students of color, our Black students, going to have to maintain their voice, put something into generative AI that says, speak in Black English. And what is that going to come out like? Because AI right now is standardized English. So I'm terrified of people losing unique voices. As a writing teacher, I don't care about your commas or whatever necessarily. I mean, that's just such a tiny part of it. We just don't want it to impede understanding. What I'm interested in is your voice, your argumentation. I always tell my students, if you guys all wrote papers, left your names off by the end of the semester, with 90% certainty, I could get whose paper is whose, just from your voice, because everybody has a distinct voice. And I can tell a generative AI essay because the voice is very bland, very generative AI.
So that's really interesting, Laura, because we came up with a term a couple episodes ago called AI washed, right? Where things have been fed into an AI so much, and we were talking specifically about email. I can send an email that I run through an AI to make it better. I send it to my boss, who uses an AI to read it and give him the highlights. He responds with an AI back to me. And what do we have? We have an AI washed conversation. And we lose our voice. I love it. No one's ever said that. And I think that's really cool.
The thing that's really super interesting about this is there's been a huge movement the last couple of years. It's called linguistic justice, and it's a movement to not squash different voices. It's a movement away from your standardized academic English. We've long been accused in academia of squashing voices to conform to an academic voice, whereas, our Black voices, our Spanish voices, what have you, are just as legitimate. So why are we adhering to this standard when those are also legitimate dialects, legitimate accents? And there's a huge movement to preserve and encourage these voices. And how does that square with the generative AI? There's two movements that, to me, they seem opposite. They push
diametrically opposed.
Yeah. So on one hand, most teachers are on board with preserving unique voices, and on the other hand, we're all going to be using generative AI. Talk about the wash thing. So I'm on this website. I've been selling. One thing I left out in my little bio is I've been writing and selling curriculum for a decade now, and there's a website that's huge that a lot of teachers, and this is K through 12, I would say mostly grade school stuff, where teachers create curriculum for other teachers. And these curriculum creators were some of the first people that I knew that jumped on generative AI. And
instead of I can produce tons of data, I can produce tons of stuff quick.
Instead of sitting there for 8 hours and writing a 4th grade reading passage about whether animals should be kept in zoos and getting the reading level right and doing all the research, you just put it in AI and it comes out pretty good. So here's the thing. So we have teachers generating the curriculum, and these kind of teacher created resources are huge. And I expect that textbook, education companies will be using generative AI too. So the curriculum is generated by AI. The students use generative AI to do the curriculum, the assignments and the exercises, and we've got machines talking to machines. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand how that's not going to be the case, but it sure feels like it.
Yeah, I think it is going to be. So what role do humans have in this whole thing?
Exactly. Just looking at it, making sure it's okay. I don't know. I don't know.
You do bring up an interesting point, and that's education. You're not caring about the outcome as much as
No.
Is the student learning? Are they progressing? Are they learning how to use these tools? Because whether we like it or not, these tools are going to be around.
Right. And so I think the worst mistake that a teacher could make at this point is to ban generative AI and to say, you can't use it. It's cheating if you use it. I'm not going to do that at all. In fact, in my syllabus, one of the first things that I said for this semester is I'm really excited to integrate generative AI technology into our classroom along with traditional writing skills so that they know right off the bat, hey, this isn't a sneaky cheating thing. We're using this. And in all the assignments, well, I wouldn't say all, but I'm doing a lot of in-class writing. I learned a lot from teaching in the prison and that brain to handwritten connection. There's something to it. So I'm going to be doing a lot of handwritten exercises in class. But back to the point, which I forgot what it was. What was I talking about?
Oh, just, how are you going to leverage generative AI? You're going to use it in the classroom.
Okay. Let's do a pause so that you can edit that part out. Okay. So the way that I've developed my assignments for this semester is, for example, an example assignment is they'll be doing all the steps to write a paper using research, addressing the opposition, all of that stuff. I'll tell them when and where they can use AI, but they have to show me the process. What sources are you going to use? Are they valid sources? So we're going to do the whole process all along, some of it in class. They're going to create the end product. And then when they're done with that, they're going to generate the AI version. And we're going to talk about how will you prompt this? Yeah. How will you write the prompt? Because here's part of critical thinking using generative AI is how do I write the prompt to get what I'm after, to express my views, to get the thesis I want, to get the opposing viewpoints that I want. So I'm going to have them do that. They're going to have the essays side by side. And then the big assignment, the assignments that's worth the most points, is they're going to compare and contrast. What did AI do better? What did I do better? What are some of the shortfalls here? Is there what, I want to see what they come up with. And that way, so it serves two purposes. I think it's practical. Here's what's going to happen when you're out in the work world and you're allowed to use generative AI. You're going to have to look at it. It's got hallucinations in it. It didn't use sources properly. It didn't cite its sources. They're going to find out all of this stuff.
It makes stuff up in a big way.
They're going to see those downfalls, and they're going to see that they do some things better and that their voice is important. So we'll see if it works.
Oh, Lord, man, I wish I had you as an English teacher.
Well, I heard another teacher had a really good example assignment too, is they watched a show. I don't know if it was a documentary or whatever it was. They watched a show in class together. And then on the spot, she generated an essay from AI. She did it right in the classroom, passed it out to the class, and then they all had to revise it and then share their revisions with groups, compare, contrast. And I thought that was a really good way to do it too. Look, here's what's generated, but how are you now going to see what's
what's valid? I love this because you're teaching practical skills that people need when they're in the workplace. You're teaching them critical thinking without worrying about as much what we get tied into. It's a problem I personally have with a lot of the way people teach. I don't care how you get to the answer. The answer is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And that was me, because I figured if you end up with a really good end product, that means that all the critical thinking skills went into it. Well, I don't think that's there anymore.
That's not there anymore, huh?
Yeah. I had a colleague yesterday. He said the essays, let's see if I get this right. The essays they write don't get them the job. The critical thinking skills, the hard work is what gets them the job. So I would say, or keep the job, because AI might have written the resume, right?
So that's very true.
So it's a complete shift for me to focus more heavily on process rather than end product. But that's just,
Well,
it is.
and in the shift, you're helping these kids understand how the process works, and they're learning how to leverage AI to be more effective in their jobs. I'm learning how to use generative AI right now, highly effective in some things. Other things, I'm like, ooh, that fell right flat on its face. I can't leverage that anymore. So I know it's an important skill.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. So I was in professional development yesterday that was cross-discipline, and the math teachers were saying, I understand your concerns, but it's like when we started using, calculators, or the more heavy duty
Yeah,
calculators,
yeah.
the same. And I argued, I got my bristles up and I said, it's not the same, because writing is about voice. Writing is about unique voices. And that's a totally different thing. And if everybody can just come up with the answer through generative AI writing, I think we've lost something that is really, really important. I'm not just talking novels. You've got fiction writers, unique voices, that just what makes art what it is, but not creative nonfiction, everything. Like you said, we don't want it washed down. Yeah, that's what that's what I'm terrified about.
Well, and it's interesting because whether we like it or not, we all communicate with words, right? Some people don't like that, whether it's spoken word or whether it's a written word. Both can be generated via AI. In fact, on my other podcast, my weekly news podcast, I now use my own cloned voice to do that in 6 different languages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so
Crazy.
my voice now can be AI washed, just as well. My vocal voice can be AI washed just as much as my written. So I love that you say we still need our own unique voices in this world where it's going to be used in lots of different things, and it's valuable. It is valuable.
Oh, it is. Ask me if I've ever created a lecture using AI. Heck yes, I have.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and doctors are starting to use it to write post operative notes and things like. It's here. It's great to help us augment the work that we do. But I'm glad that you've pulled out, and I love what you said. Your voice still is unique in who you are.
Yeah, and part of our job as teachers, especially, well, I wouldn't say especially at the higher education level, at all levels, is to value and acknowledge those unique voices so that generative AI is less seductive.
Oh, I love, man, you should write a book about this, Laura. Let's write a book.
No, I shouldn't. I know nothing. Talk to me after the semester is over and we'll see.
Well, this is really the first semester, right? This is the first school year where generative AI has been generally available. You probably had a couple of students.
Yeah, I got some generative AI at the end of 2022, and I didn't recognize it right off. I was just like, this is not her voice. I recognized the voice. I was like, this is not her voice. And I couldn't find it in a plagiarism. And then it dawned on me too late that it was AI, but she didn't have any sources cited because this was early, right?
Yeah.
And then I was teaching in the prison in the spring. So this is really the first go at it. But I've been thinking long and hard, and everybody in education has. In fact, the U.S. Department of Education, government moves slowly, but I was really glad to see what they had to say about using AI in education. They said, I don't have the exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase it. It was something like, we're going to use AI more like an electric bike than a robot vacuum. The user is still in control, but the burden is lessened.
Well, I kind of like that.
Yeah,
I
not
hope it's
exactly
true.
where I'd like it to be, but I think it's on the right track.
Yeah, I hope it's more true than not. But I also truly believe this: if you don't understand how to use it, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, that's true.
That I truly believe that. It reminds me It feels a lot like it felt in the early 1990s. I had access to email even in the late 80s. I was fortunate, to say the least. No one else in my family did. I did. But when I got out of school, I was already used to the internet. No one else around me was, and it got me jobs that I never would have had beforehand. And then it started proliferating throughout society. I think the same thing's going to happen with GenAI. Those that understand it are going to be more desirable in the workplace, understand how to use it effectively. And there's so many new use cases that are popping up all over the place. So Laura, thank you for teaching our next generation, because you're right there at the forefront of all that.
Well, nobody is going to be an effective teacher if they don't embrace it and use it. If you just forbid it, it'd be like, people who've been teaching forever said they remember the days when teachers were saying no internet, you can only use print sources. Like
my kids. That was for my kids. That wasn't that long ago, Laura. Well, Laura, thanks again for coming on the show. It's always fun to talk to you, but now on the show, it's even better. So we're going to have you back. We'll have you back at Christmas time after the first semester, and we'll see how it goes. It may be that your hair's this big or pulled out. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
We'll see how disappointed all my students are. They thought they were going to, come in and write generative AI essays and, not spend any time. So we'll see how they like the new approach.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see.
You're going to learn in spite of yourself.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.